Well, we've been looking at the life of Elisha now for a few weeks, and we're going to carry on. Now, if you remember last week, in the city of Samaria, Elisha had taken in the raiding parties and given them food, and they'd gone away in peace. God was good to them. But do you know, the king of Syria, Ben-Hadad, he didn't think much of God at all. And he sent his armies down and they camped around the city of Samaria. Nobody could go in. No one could go in. That meant no food could get into the city. And so as the days went by, people would start eating the food that they had in their cupboards, in their larders, and very soon the food ran out. And when the food ran out, it was awful. You know, if you wanted to buy food, you know, what you would find is even the worst type of food, like a donkey's head. I don't know if anyone's having that for dinner today. I would doubt it. But a donkey's head was going for loads of money. Only the rich could afford it. And other worse things were going on that people were eating. Do you know, it was awful. The king of Israel, Jehoram, do you know, he blamed God. He saw what was going on and he said, it's all God's fault. He never looked at himself and said, you know, I've broken God's law and the people here are breaking God's law. We deserve the punishment which God sends. He blamed God. He couldn't get at God. So he decided, I'm going to kill the person who loves God. And he decided to kill Elisha, because he was the one who loved God and who would tell the people all about God and who he was, what he was like. He wanted to kill him. And he called some of his servants together and he said to them, look, go down to his house, get him and we will kill him. But you know, God knows everything and God sent someone to warn him. And of course, when he was heard, he locked the doors, locked the windows so that no one could come in. And so when the soldiers turned up, they couldn't get in. Because God has been good in warning him. And of course, when the king turned up not long after, all the king did was to blame God. It's all his fault. People do that today, don't they? When things happen which they don't like, it's always God's fault. Not our fault, but God's fault. And you know, Elisha, he had been told by God something. And so he told the king. And he told the king that by this time tomorrow, there would be that much food in the city that it would be going not for lots of money, but for just pennies. And everyone could afford it. Do you know, when one of the servants who was stood outside, one of the king's servants heard, he laughed. And he said, if God was to open the windows in heaven, he couldn't supply that much food. But he forgot how great a God we have. And you know, as he spoke those words, you know, he said God couldn't make it happen. That was something against the God who, you know, Elijah was talking about. And Elijah said to him, listen, you're going to see this food tomorrow, but you're not going to be able to eat any of it. You know, the doors were shut. They couldn't do anything, so off they went home. That night, they all went to bed, and the king had a late morning, I think. But early in the morning, people outside the gate, lepers, they couldn't go inside the city to be safe. They had to stay outside because they had leprosy. They began to think to themselves, and they were thinking, do you know, if we stay here, we're going to die. But down the road, the Syrians, they've got food. And maybe if we were to go down there and speak to them, maybe they will spare us. And if they don't, what's going to happen to us? We're going to die. We'll die if we stay here. We might die, but we might get freed if we go that way. So they decided to go. And they set off towards the camp. Do you know, as they got to the camp, they didn't see any of the soldiers coming out to them. No spears, no arrows came their way. And as they came into the camp, there was no one there. And they were thinking, where is everyone? They went into the tents. There was food, there was gold and silver, nice clothes, but nobody. Do you know, God is great. That night, God had made the people here, the Syrians here, what sounded to them like a great army. And they sat there thinking to themselves, what's that? Maybe it's the Egyptians and the Hittites. That both armies have come together and they've come to help the king of Israel. And because of that, they ran. Do you know, God's able to do great things. And sometimes we forget how great our God is. And they'd ran, and they'd ran. And there was no one in the camp. Do you know, the people, they sat down and they started to eat. Lovely feast. And you could imagine them picking up the food and eating it. And all of a sudden, one of them sat there and said, do you know, this isn't right, is it? He said, let's go and tell the people in the city because they need to hear that there is food. And they thought, yeah, let's go. And that's what they did. They went all the way from there down to the city walls and they spoke to those who were on guard and they said to them that there was food. The Syrians have gone. Well, they couldn't do much, but they did tell the king. And when the king got up and he went out to the walls and looked out, he looked and he couldn't see anyone from a distance in the camp. But it could be a trap. It could be that they wanted all of the people to come out of the city and then the Syrians would attack. So he said, I know what we'll do. We've still got 2 chariots left and some horses. We'll get them to go out and to go down the road and see if we can see any of them. And that's what they did. They went looking and they went miles all the way to the River Jordan. And there was nobody. Oh, there was swords which had been dropped on the floor. There was shields. There was food. There was water jugs on the floor. There was loads of things. Almost like as they'd been running, they'd said, oh, I'm not carrying this. And they had thrown it to the floor. Because God had made them so afraid and they just ran. So they came back and they told the king and the king was pleased. Right, we need to let the people go out. And the man who had been laughing at God, saying he couldn't do it, was the man the king chose to go on the gate. And so his job was to make sure the gate was opened, and if anything happened, he could close it and things like that. Now, of course, when everyone heard there was food, everyone rushed out the city, and they ran up and they got as much food as they could carry. Some people couldn't, so they would take the food back to them. And you know, when they took them back, the food that was there, and they sold it to them, was that cheap. And that's just what God had said, wasn't it? It would be sold for pennies. And that's what was happening now. You see, God's word is true. The servant, though, who had laughed at God, as the gates had been opened, the people had gone past, he had fallen on the floor, and he had been stood on and trampled on, and he died. You see, God does punish sin. Here was a man who laughed at God, didn't think God could do it, didn't have the power or anything like that. And this is a story which does remind us, you know, how he didn't, eat, just as God had said. He saw it, but he didn't eat. You see, God's word is always true. Whenever we read about what God says, it always comes true. Whenever we read about sin, we need to remember God does punish sin. And there's just a few things as we look at this story of Elisha that we need to remember each day.